Secluded communities. Hey X, I have a story from a few years ago that I recently remembered, and now I'm curious what you think. I currently live in Oregon, so that's where this happened. My first job out of high school was at a grocery store in my smallish town, 30,000 people, and I worked as a clerk in the natural food/nutrition section, so I got some weird people coming through every week, but none that have stayed with me years later like this one. One night, at around 10, two very tall men approached me and asked for my help finding some vitamins/herbs. Both of them struck me as strange immediately, but I was and still am polite and friendly by nature, so I pushed aside any suspicion and met them with my usual smile. The younger of the two was over 6'5", and the older was even taller, but not quite 7 feet based on my memory. They were ethnically white, had the same shade of brown hair, early to mid-20s, and were brothers. The thing about them that surprised me the most was that they could not read. They had approached me because they needed me to tell them which bottles were what. The older brother was looking specifically for any herbs that would help with ADHD and concentration issues. When I started to explain what some herbs are known for helping, he got very standoffish and almost offended that I would assume he did not know his herb knowledge. The younger was much more friendly and pretty obviously had a thing for me. I'm a femme. He was curious about my hair color, and when I told him I dyed it black, but it was naturally brown, similar to their own, he acted like that was the stupidest thing I could do. When they left, I mentioned the encounter to a coworker, and he told me that they were part of a family that lived secluded out in the woods somewhere around town. I may have seen their mother in the store that night too. She had a family resemblance, and I kind of just had a gut feeling that she was like the two men, but I can't be sure. Regular weirdo sex? Or maybe something more. I live in the South. I haven't had many run-ins with people like that. I work in a grocery store, but I had one woman ask me about coconut water. So I asked her what she needed the coconut water for, and she started talking to me about how she uses it to wash over a necklace she has to ward off voodoo. She went on about these strange superstitions from her home country, things like keeping an open pair of scissors under her bed and burning some herbs she got from a botanica. Another thing I heard from a coworker is how in certain counties in my state, the conversation about how having healthy father-daughter, brother-sister relationships, incest and breeding, is something their social worker wife had to have too often while they lived in those really rural counties. I live in the Midlands, one of the areas of England that has been densely populated for millennia. Some areas are very secluded. There's old blood families and older traditions that far predate both Christianity and the Roman cultural invasion. So, there is this town, and by town, I mean like one main road and like a private school, a manor, and 3 or 4 cul-de-sacs offshooting from the main road that winds through the woodlands alongside the motorway heading south. It's a quick time saver that cuts like 15 minutes off following the motorway to the huge multi-level island that allows me to get onto an intersecting eastbound motorway to get off at my own town. Instead, I head through this place, which leads onto some back roads with an abandoned mental institution and an airfield, and through an old army barracks, now a supply depot for truckers, and I'm home. Small out-of-the-way place, right? Well, it always seemed a little odd. Weird tree trunk carved into the shape of animals like a stag, an owl, or a huge snake always caught my eye, but more besides. You never saw people, ever. You would drive past the school at lunchtime and see no children on the playground. No sound of rambunctious kids, but everything was clean and maintained. The town was as clearly inhabited as any other, but you never saw people. Once, during an insane flooding period about 5 years ago, All of the buses were out of service, and I had to walk from college along the motorway in a t-shirt and jeans in a torrential downpour, and by the time I reached the town, I passed by a bus so clearly. About an hour later, with my feet sore and soggy, the buses were back on, so I wait at the town bus stop. I wait for an hour. 3 buses passed me. Not one stopped. I never saw another person in the town. So, that's all just set up. I'll make another post for my story. So, as we established, this town, well, a village I suppose, was strange, yes? So here is the story. Late autumn time, back in 2008, I think. Me and some at the time first-year college buddies are doing what most English lads do at the time, which is get in their shitty boy racer cars and go cruising around the countryside, and maybe in the evening in the city. Hit the pubs and bars, grab some pizza or a kebab, head home by 1 and call it good. So, we do our thing. We head to my college town for some particularly amazing Indian food and head back to my place for some beers and rock band. Naturally, we want to take my usual shortcut. This time, however, it was different. Bear in mind, we aren't dude bros. We never drink and drive. I rarely drink at all, in fact, so we were all completely sober. I was in the passenger seat, my buddy driving, and my brother and his GF in the back. We head for the village, and something is up. There are lit lanterns everywhere. We slow down, figuring it's some Halloween thing, but it's not even October yet, so it's a little too early. I think it was closer to when our primary school teachers would tell us about the tradition of harvest festivals. But I'm 26, so primary school was a long time ago at this point. Anyway, we slow down and cruise at a slower than walking pace with our interest peaked. It's not just lanterns, but decorations, including what I can only describe as scarecrows or stuffy guys ready to sit atop a bonfire. Some were sitting in chairs on porches. Others stood up around town like people, and a noise, like drums beating. So, we were thoroughly creeped out, but still slowly moving, being the cliché horror movie dumb teens, enthralled by the utter strangeness. There was an odd tang to the air, like burning rubber, oranges, and semen, a strange melange of scents I've never forgotten. We could tell from the glare as we rounded the first corner. We could see an orange glow from a large fire on the huge open area alongside the half-mile track leading from the paved road to the secluded manor house. We could not see because of the typical English hedgerows, but we could hear a loud commotion, clearly people, but also some strange sounds, like if you have ever heard a pig scream, and I don't mean squeal. Anyone who has heard it knows a pig can scream, and it's almost human-like, but not quite. So, we start to speed up a little. We roll the windows up. This ain't no movie or creepypasta. This was real life, and yeah, I will admit, we were pretty fucking spooked. Still, we go slow enough to eye all the weird shit around. The wooden trunks carved into animals have what I can only describe as offerings before them. One a bushel of grains, another offal, another cakes or something, and so on. Bear in mind, this is 11 p.m. in autumn. The sky is pitch black here. No stars from cloud cover, and everything lit by the flickering orange glow of the old school fire and oil-looking lanterns hanging from poles and tree branches everywhere. Then we get to the green, such as it was in this little village. Behind it was the pub, the bus stop I mentioned before, and a small grass patch surrounded by chain-link fence in between. On the grass, there was a dead cow on its back, split open down the middle. This was the point I felt genuine fear in a my life could end tonight sort of way, because cut into the cow was a bunch of guys in what I can only describe as shitty wizard outfits, red robes with sun, moon, and stars on them, like a little kid wanting to be Albus Dumbledore. They had knives and were cutting into this thing like there was a treasure inside, If only they could cut deep enough. The driver stopped. They stopped and looked at us. We looked at them. A couple of seconds passed, but it felt like a good 5 or 6 minutes. Then they bellowed and ran at the car, so all of a sudden, we are the unlucky Spanish cops in Resident Evil 4, and the Ganados are out for us. A brick bounces off the windshield with a crack, leaving a fracture that was very expensive to repair for my bro's student income. They are yelling, "Stop 'em, get 'em," and "Road should have been closed," and a bunch of shit I cannot make out. Needless to say, we are all screaming, "Fucking drive," and we do. One guy hits the back just as we are accelerating, and looking back, I see the weapon he was cutting into the cow with was a straight, ornate-looking knife of a very dark metal. The rest becomes a blur as we speed down the back roads at almost triple the legal speed limit and get back home. Here is the kicker. Car is damaged, clearly. Took a fucking brick to the windscreen after all, so we call the police. 2 mid-40s coppers arrive 3 hours later. Good old, expeditious UK countryside police time, and ask us what happened. We explain. They look at each other with a look that clearly says, if these kids were behind that wheel, we would breathalyzer them and get a positive at first. Then they ask where we were. We tell them. This time they share a different look. The kind of look you see 2 kids share when they are asked by their parents if they know if their friend did something bad, and indeed they do. They mention to look into it, but it sounds like drunks. Just be careful at night, lads, and leave. We never heard anything of it. Epilogue. My now deceased granddad, who used to run the biggest accident recovery firm in the area, and naturally was the place the cops came for on the job. Cups of tea and biscuits and a gossip had mentioned the town more than once apparently. For one period in the year, bad stuff happens there, and it's just ignored. Some pull from the manor-born folk who own most of the area apparently. My granddad told me about one time he was called there at the time for an abandoned car and found a young girl cut to pieces under the bridge leading out of town. He got very pale. His hand shook, and with a bitter laugh mentioned how the cops that came to the call-out were both from the town, and with a look of disgust mentioned one of them lifting up one of the girl's removed breasts and said, "Hey Derek, want to cop a handful of tit?" Like it was nothing. It was reported in the media as an accident, one of many. It's a bad road that time of year, people say. People get cut off in floods or snow and just end up meeting a bad end, people say. They accept it. They do not question it. All I know is I have not been down that road in half a decade and don't plan to go there anytime soon. A lot of talk for an unfortunately low payoff story that I'm sure sounds like generic bullshit. That's life, I suppose. Even when people are fucking crazy, it's still just a story, one that plays out the world over. I just know I will never forget that night. Never stop wondering what was going on and what would have happened if we did not drive off in time. Then I just thank fuck that we did. I can tell you about the time I slept in a field and heard bizarre chanting in the early midnight, just 100 or so meters away from my spot, inside a small duvet in my clearing. I heard bizarre speaking and sounds. I wasn't carrying back then like I am now, so I was pretty freaked out. Not being noticed though, I found my balls and slowly went closer to the sounds. Farm field is usually separated by thin tree lines, varying in width of density to the next field. Creeping up the hillside into the tree line of the next field, I could make out 3 people, likely all men, hacking and smashing some kind of corpse in the distance. Think rural south, all with its ticks, mosquitoes, fireflies, and chirping from the crickets. The intensity of these sounds was nowhere around. Not one peep from wildlife or the insects that usually inhabit a night in the south. Scared and just a few dozen meters from the men, as I sit hidden in the tree line, I can barely make out the shape of what they are hooting and hollering around. It's a dead cow. Now fearful for my life, I turn around and make haste to grab my backpack and book it out of there. I, to my disbelief, cartoonishly stepped on a stick and it snapped. I looked instantly back in fear and saw 3 whack jobs staring in my direction, and then they started yelling to me as if they knew I was there, and I just booked it. I darted and they started screaming behind me. I snatched up my book bag, left my sleeping bag on the ground, still unraveled, and leapt through the fields, all the while my heart pounding out of my chest. They are still screeching behind, probably about half a football field away, saying they're gonna gut me and cut my head off. I leapt for a few more tree lines, jump over a fence, and post into another field, and finally make it to the long, unlit road beside the properties. I trip and fall over in a roll down into a small ditch next to my side of the road, get up, and then scrabble across the asphalt. By the time I get over the fence on the opposite side of the road, which was a much more flat plane and easier to maneuver, climbing over the barbed wire, sticking my shoes into the metal spikes, the hollering had stopped, and I turned around to see if they were following me. I was almost paralyzed by my anxiousness. I did not know if they were still there, and the field next to me was open moonlight, so for sure if they were now next to the road, they would be able to see me. Hidden by the black shadow of the common tree line, I just waited, and I waited, and I fucking waited for what seemed to be ages, and I felt a bit more calm as each minute went by. Eventually, I felt like I could move from there, but I didn't. I was still scared, and just wanted morning to come already, a long ways off. Then something moved. Someone moved across the road, on the side I had just came from. Literally, someone had stood there for what seemed like an eternity, and they walked off, back the way they chased me. I felt like I was going to be stabbed in the back any second, so I just waited and prayed that he did not see me. I stayed there until early morning sunrise, when the light becomes red and orange, and I could see clearer over the tree line. Yet I stayed still in that spot, finally lying down until the first cars started to pass by the spot, eventually heading towards the town I had previously attempted to get to before nightfall, the night I had just lived through. The moral of the story is that you need to fucking carry. Don't be a stupid kid who thinks he's invincible. I don't know if they would have actually killed me. Maybe they were trying to scare me, but I feel as though no non-murderer would stay in a spot, secluded in the darkness, waiting to see me, unless they were fucked in the head. I'm not good at Greentext either, nor am I special at telling experiences/stories. You get what you get, but it is the truth. That's a spooky story, Anon. I'm guessing you didn't head back to check the scene during the day. There are cults all over America, even though someone brushed that off as superstition. Call it what you will, but there is a reason witch trials were a thing. Creepy fucking world. Glad you're safe, Anon. No, I headed straight to the town I meant to get to the night before. I was too much of a pussy to even attempt to go back. Thankfully, traffic was a bit busier on the roads near regular morning hours. I'd like to affirm that I still hitchhiked to the next town, but it was through the freeway, and their character seemed solid. Happy old veteran type. This was before my bad hitchhiking incident, which led to me beelining back home across states to disgruntled parents and purchasing firearms for future journeys. I absolutely agree with you that there are some Class A psycho death cults and serial killers in America. Hitchhiking nowadays, even previously, is dangerous as hell. Murder is still very easy to get away with, depending on your environment. I grew up in a tiny town, sub 1,000 population, very rural. There was a 2-lane road leading out, and most everything was gravel. Got a lot of stories from there. One that I remember the clearest is walking along the riverbank deep in the woods behind the falls. I was there with a couple of friends. I remember it because it was summer. I remember it was summer because of the whine of the June bugs and the red and black beetles who'd land on us every now and then and freak my friend out. Anyway, we are walking along this overgrown trail when we see a bag with something sticking out of it. Chris, that's the one who does not like bugs, does not want anything to do with it. Matt does. I'm the deciding vote, and I'm like, hell yeah. So we go over and see what's in the bag. Bones. No big deal. It's a rural town. People abandon their pets in messed up ways, or maybe it died or whatever. We press on. Further down the overgrown trail, on the lookout for sumac and poison oak. Dead pine needles crunching underfoot. There's another bag, this time hanging from a tree. Again, bones. These ones a little less identifiable. Chris wants to go home now. I tell him to shut up. We are not far away from where a good place to swim is, at least I think. It makes sense. The further away from the falls you go, the better the swimming holes, right? We walk in silence for a good 10 minutes or so, and we come across the shack. Wood all gray and gnarled from the weather, leaning to one side, and it smells just awful. Matt wants to check it out. I want to check it out. Even Chris wants to check it out. So we start crunching our way towards it, when we start hearing these sickening whumps coming from the inside of it. By the time I say maybe we should leave, Chris is already halfway home. I will never forget the way it smelled. Sweet, cloying, but also like the worst rot ever. All my life, I had lived in small, secluded towns in northern Canada. For about 8 years, we lived in a town that was hours from any major place. At the time, this town was hardly on any map. Within the town, I went to the only high school around, which was a 45-minute drive from my house. There was also another family and their 12 children that attended that school. It did not take me long to notice that there was something off about these kids. There was one in my grade. He was pretty cool and seemingly normal most of the time. We became pretty good friends. However, in the grades below, the other kids seemed to look more fucked up. There was 2 in the 11th grade that looked pretty normal. One was a guy named Kyle, the other a girl named Brittany. Although they looked normal, the way they acted was off. They were always so close to each other. I've even seen them sitting on each other's laps. I was a little weirded out, but I never said anything. In the lower grades, there was 4 others spread out between grades 9 and 10, 2 sets of twins. These kids, however, looked different. They all looked the same, but the younger 2 had more deformities. One had something fucked up with their hand. The other's eyes looked more sunken in. There were 4 other, much younger children in the family that were downright scary and hard to look at. Every one of the kids had the same features. Black hair, sky blue, insanely light eyes, pale skin, and their voices were disturbingly similar. I spent a few years hanging out with the older one. As I said, he was completely normal. I remember we would always hang out at my place though. He would be quick to protest anything involving people going to his house, as if he was scared of having us there or something. A lot of people would talk about that family. Specific things I would hear was about the younger kids and how the parents were strange people. I never met any of them in person, but I've seen pictures. The parents had the same look, but they also looked like they have not eaten or been outside in years. They looked sickly pale and scary skinny. Many times, child services were called to their house. I don't really know what went down there, but those younger kids were so fucked up. One was always sick, and his general face structure was off. His eyes were extremely sunken in. His skin had a gray tint to it. His hair was stringy, and patches were missing a lot. The other, also a boy, had the same facial deformities, but it was accompanied with mental problems. He was so violent. In 1992, I finally moved out of that town and lost touch with my friend. In 1998, I heard through another friend from the same place that the family is confirmed for committing incest. The 2 youngest that I knew were the children of the 2 siblings I knew in 11th grade. After that, they had more kids that came out even more fucked up. My friend moved far, far away at the age of 20. right after graduation and was never heard from again. Fuck small towns. For me, a few summers ago, some friends and I decided to do some spelunking in abandoned places around local cities. There is this old campus from the 50s or 60s that is just rotting in the middle of a small city near us. It's near the edge of town, and the only way to access it are these little gaps in fences. It's sort of surrounded by small patches of forest, so it is pretty secluded. It was pretty standard, abandoned building stuff, if you've ever done that sort of thing. Several buildings, ranging from walkable to completely destroyed. Lots of trash, graffiti, drugs and alcohol remains. We did not see anyone else there, but it was obvious that people go there fairly often. Cops do patrol the area occasionally to keep out any drifters or people that shack up there, apparently. Only one of my friends had been there before, and he actually noticed something. One building had a huge gate around it, with barbed wire fencing. It wasn't worth getting past the gate, and he had never gone into that particular building before. However, a tree had fallen over and knocked the gate down, so we got to go in. As we explored the completely dark building, it was in much better condition than the others, and we had been only some of the lucky few to be allowed in. The building was different. There were massively secure doors, and eventually we concluded that each of the rooms were actually small cells where they kept people. I thought this was a school, we all chirped. It was creepy. We got to the top floor, and there was a big open room, auditorium type. Sounds echoed like crazy in there. The only graffiti on the wall was just, "Children died here." That one building was a juvenile detention center located on the campus for bad kids. It was eerie to come across it like that.